her and hers. And I want to talk to you about robots and how robots, synthetic, and AI characters can explore gender representation in fiction. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, thanks. And maybe in real life too. So before I get started, I want to do a couple of quick disclaimers about the content that I'm going to present. For the most part, I'm going to be talking about the transgender experience and gender non-binary identities for like the majority of this talk. In general, when I say non-binary gender identities, I want to talk about how robots can explore genderqueer, gender fluid, agender, non-gender, and lots of other gender identities that can exist, and gender identities that we don't yet know about. But because I can't say that whole thing every single time I say transgender and gender non-binary, unless I'm referring to something specific, I'm going to say, when I say trans and non-binary, I basically mean to refer to that full group of ideas. Also, because the language around gender is constantly changing, like really, really rapidly, and this talk is being recorded. If you're watching this on video and it's like 5 years from now, I'm probably going to sound like grandma. There's nothing I can do about that. And finally, I just want to clarify before I get into everything that when I talk about robot and AI characters exploring transgender and non-binary roles, I absolutely do not mean to suggest that they should ever replace a human transgender character in a fictional story. Rather that robots and synthetic characters and AI characters can sort of add to the discussion around transgender identity in fiction by like providing a unique opportunity and unique takes on those issues because of, you know, the flexibility of like what robots and artificial intelligence can provide with respect to presenting identity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, about the balance between those things, because it's a little bit tricky to describe. Okay, I want to show you some robots. These are all fictional robots from fictional creations that you may or may not recognize. Does anybody know this one? So as I go through these robots, I want you to think about 3 questions. The first question is, does this robot have a gender? And if so, do you know what it is, and what is that gender? The second question is, why do you think that this or that robot has this gender? As a lot of you probably know, like, has anybody ever programmed gender for an artificial intelligence here? Like, as you could probably imagine that that's sort of a time-consuming thing to do. I'll let you unpack this one for a while. You can imagine that would be like a pretty time-consuming thing to do. So I want you to think about, like, why do you think that this robot was given a gender? Like, was that even in scope? Like how long did that take to happen? And why do you think that would happen? And finally, if this character has a gender, if this robot character has a gender, do you think that the gender was chosen by this character? Or do you think that the character was pre-programmed with a gender identity by somebody else? And if so, is it hard-coded, or is it some sort of gender deciding algorithm that's able to change and be flexible over time? Okay, now I'm going to look at some robots that exist today, or maybe will someday soon. And I want you to think about the same questions as we go through these. So what gender does this robot have, if any? Why would you say it has that gender? And who chose the gender for this robot? This robot is allowed to choose its own snacks, which is really cool, I think. It's got like some almonds and some chia seeds, maybe. It's like maybe it lives in Portland or something. This is a photograph I took really recently, actually. This is a pepper robot. And they are a sort of kiosk greeter robot that works at a few stores in Japan, in Tokyo right now. And this one is sleeping. In the documentation I've seen so far, this robot has a pronoun it, which, like, if you have played the previously shown Detroit Become Human, is a gender-neutral pronoun, I guess, but it's a little bit maybe dehumanizing if you're trying to create a character that is something your readers can, or a character that your readers can empathize with. Okay, so who am I and why do I care about this? So I'm an artist, as Matt mentioned. I write and draw a queer fantasy relationship comic called Moonsprout Station, and the main story of the Moonsprout Station right now. So Moonsprout Station is a train station on an island floating in the sky that's full of lots of happy queer characters. And in this world, the concept of being a non-binary gender is completely common. It's not something that anybody is struggling to figure out in a mainstream way. And this is a world that I created because this is a type of world that I want to see more in literature, and I just kind of felt that if it's something that I want from the future, like I need to build it in fiction if I want to explore it and have fun with it. But at the same time, for myself, I still need to explore different ideas around gender transition, around discovering identity. And so I have a character in the story called Maple, who's made out of wood. They used to be a mannequin. That's them there too, coming up to that bridge. They used to be a mannequin, and a month before the events of the story, they found themselves to be alive. And they don't know why, but they've decided to join their community and try to participate and have an active, vibrant life. But in doing so, they're coming into all of these questions about how they represent their identity and what does gender mean in their society, what does it mean to them, and how do I talk about my past when I've only kind of been alive for a month. Those sorts of questions I want to be able to talk about with Maple, who's this sort of synthetic character. Just a little bit more about me. I also paint backgrounds for Rise of the Eagle Princess, which is a JRPG that's coming out next year, I hope. And from 2014 to 2018, I worked at Cast Iron Coding, which is a web development studio just over in the Washington High School Revolution Hall building. And there I got to work on a bunch of really cool projects about presenting different types of media with CMS platforms. I wrote a lot of JavaScript for Manifold, which is a brand new open access, open source academic publishing platform that a few different academic presses are already using. You can use it too. I would love it if you checked it out and asked me questions about it too if you want. So that is me, and I think how robots express gender in fiction is important. But that is just me, and I wanted to bring you some ideas from other creators who think about this a lot too. In the past when I've talked about this, it's been like on a panel with other people, and so I'm going to try and recreate that experience a little bit by giving you feedback from other people too. So Ben Lehman is a writer for Otodon games. He is one of he's the lead designer of the RPG I just showed you. And he also makes a bunch of his own RPGs and stuff. He says, stories about non-biological beings like robots or artificial intelligences let us look at gender at a remove from our own ideas about biology, sex, and morality. Since robots are not part of our gender system, we are free to explore their gender or lack thereof and leave our own prejudices behind. So in other words, robots are free by their nature from our social environment, and since they don't participate in that social system, it gives us the opportunity to reevaluate what gender means when we design them and when we create robot characters. So if you look back at some of the characters that, the fictional characters that we looked at before, we can ask ourselves, like, again, why? Why do they have the genders that they do? Was it based on their role or their assigned task? Is it based on their voice, or is it based on their appearance? Maybe it was when these characters were created, but it really doesn't have to be. None of those things in the robot world have to map to an existing gender binary that we have, and instead we can explore and create new roles and characters. Something in popular fiction that does this really well right now, it's not a robot story, but it's Steven Universe and the gem characters in that show. I don't want to like go too spoilery for anyone who hasn't seen the show, but basically there's characters called gems. They're from another planet. They're a sort of non-organic space rock light projection species. And in the context of the show, they use she and her pronouns, all of them do. But there's nothing in the text of Steven Universe that says that these characters have a gender that maps to anything that we have on our planet or culture. And that breaks down two really serious ideas that we tend to have about gender. One is that the characters need to, the way that these characters look and behave or maybe sound like necessarily needs to map to a specific gender. That's not in Steven Universe. And the other thing is, as you can see from this sampling, like these characters all look really different, and as you can imagine, they all behave really differently. But there's nothing in the text about any of those traits mapping to specific genders either. There's nothing in Gem World, at least as far as we know. This could all change tomorrow, I'm sorry. It was a bad example, no. And don't tell me if it is, I'm like one episode behind, oh my gosh. Yeah, this could all change, but as far as we know, Gem World doesn't have 2 genders either. It could have 50 genders, or it could just have the one. And that is another very fundamental idea that this show breaks down. And this show is like targeting like young audiences. It's so great. It's super exciting. So in Understanding Comics, which is an important work about how to read and make comics, Scott McCloud talks about how when we see ourselves in simplified form, we're able to identify with that form visually in a bit more than we would with something that looked more specific. And so this goes back to Steven Universe, but also with robots. If robots are having gender roles and identities that exist completely outside our social spectrum and are non-binary or possibly non-binary and similar to something that a human might experience now or aren't entirely new, because robots can look close enough to human features but still have that sort of like very simplistic, abstracted feature set, we might be able to play with our own identities by having robots that experiment with entirely new ones. So if you think about gender and robots a lot, like I do, you've probably read Oh Human Star by Blue Telequanti, or are reading it. It's an ongoing webcomic. And if you are interested in robots and you haven't read it, you should. I also don't want to spoil this either because it's a long, deep, mysterious story. But I will talk about it in a second. So Blue says that she is super interested in the idea that self-aware robotic characters have unique perspectives on gender given that their nature free them from human assumptions about the aspects and immutability of gender identity. If robots can live for hundreds of years in dozens of chassis, surely their concept of gender can change, and if so, is it so unlikely that humans can do the same? Would a robot chafe at the idea of being gendered for no other reason than its strength or physical abilities, like a Boston Dynamics robots are often coded male, or its designation to fulfill requests like Siri and Alexa? So let's talk a little bit about how the code that runs a robot and that robot's personality and behavior can be completely changed and is infinitely malleable. I know what some of you are thinking is that I use an immutable library. My code isn't going anywhere. It's not going to go off willy-nilly. Same function, same result. That was my one programmer joke that I allowed myself, by the way. There's probably not going to be another one. But when you think about it, even if you are using the latest immutable library and you've got some sweet functional programming going on, you're still going to have OS upgrades or periodic changes or pull requests about how your color spectrum library doesn't work. And then the software is going to change. And the software is going to change really quickly. It's going to change probably a lot faster than humans are used to. Their emotional, sort of their greater emotional status changing, or their personality changing, or their gender changing. And by extension, you could even, well, actually, I should just pause for a second to explain this panel. There's a panel from Oh Human Star, the comic that I mentioned, by Blue Delaquanti. And this is, to not give too much away, this is a synthetic character talking about the freedoms that they enjoy by having a body that is malleable and changeable. So if you think about how your piece of software, whether it's the mind of a robot or something much more basic, can change completely, you could also envision how like an algorithmic mind that is just set in place and is able to change and adapt to its environment could change drastically from moment to moment, and that could apply to gender as well. Lawrence Gulo, who is a longtime queer comic creator, he was recently involved in Behind the Mask, which is a zine about sort of uncommon images of masculinity in gamer culture, and Love and Exorcism, which is a magical dating game that he's working on right now. He also performs like nerdlesque and burlesque under the name Lewd Alfred Douglas. This is an art piece of his with a character he's working on that is a transgender robot character. He says, creating a robot character who's been assigned a gender and our physical sex characteristics forces us to interrogate why these aspects are given to a self-aware being without their prior knowledge or consent. Why does this contribute to their function? While we often see AI characters divert from their assigned function after becoming self-aware, like Hal or something, rarely do we explore that gender assignment is also ripe for the reinterpretation. So, like, when an AI character does have that moment that inevitably happens in fiction where they turn on their creators, like, why don't they also decide that, you know, the way that they've been socialized is beyond the confines of their environment? So one thing I want to talk about might be obvious at this point in the discussion, but in general, we need stories with human characters that represent transgender and gender non-binary identities and roles. And if you have characters in your story that are from these other underrepresented groups, and the story also has humanoid robots, then it bears representing those identities with those robots as well. If you do otherwise, you're kind of showing the reader that despite what they may think about the world and understand about the world, society's blueprint of normalcy still doesn't include these marginalized groups. So to give an example from my own life, and sort of a real-world example of how this has impact. I'm transgender and identify as female. And I've spent some time working on my voice, but I'm still really sensitive about it and how it causes others to perceive me, especially in a situation like this or in a situation where I'm being recorded. And I think about it a lot when those things happen. But if it was commonplace to have a robot character in fiction, or even like a digital assistant like Alexa or the Google Assistant, had like let's say a default setting where they had a deeper resonant, like a more resonant voice like I do, but just use she, her pronouns, it would be a great source of comfort for me. And so there's just a few reasons why I think it's important to have robots in fiction and increasingly in the real world explore these different identities. It's important to remember, of course, that if you do have a synthetic character in your story and they are grappling with these issues or they're exploring these identities, that they're not the only character that's doing this also. And that goes back to my earlier disclaimer about this. So if you have, let's say, a synthetic or a robot character in your story and they're the only character who is queer, then you sort of have the opposite dehumanizing effect where you're saying, well, being trans isn't normal, so only this robot is trans. And I just want to caution against that. Finally, I have one more quote from Tanika Stotts, who is an amazing creator and writer. She writes Love Circuits, which is a relatively new webcomic that deals with robots and gender as well, and also is a creator of the Ignatz Award-winning Elements, which is a creators of color anthology that is amazing. Beyond Anthology, Deja Brew, which was an award-winning webcomic, and like a bajillion other things. You should just go follow them, and you'll be amazed. She says, Love Circuits was made to take on the thoughts in sci-fantasy that gender is just a binary. It corrupts that notion like a virus and begins to break down that antiquated, socially constructed coding and rewrites it page by page. Unapologetic in diversity, language, and most of all, love. It's where I share my thoughts on how AI can love much more than I. It outgrows mere programming and challenges our very simple thoughts on the future in a whole. So if you're an author, you might be wondering right now, what can I do with this information? The first thing you can do is hire a trans person or a non-binary person to help you out with your work. If that's not already you, then you're ready. Go forth. But you could also like hire or talk to other trans people about their experience, because everybody's experience is really different, and there's no like one transgender experience. And to that effect, you can give all of your characters the opportunity to start with one of many gender identities and allow it to change just as any part of their personality might. And when in doubt, just ask a trans person. If you're a reader, you can participate by seeking out literature that explores these themes. And also, when you find a character in literature that is synthetic or not, you might question these same. You might ask yourself these same questions about like, why does this character have this gender, and who gave them the gender, and are they able to change it? And also read these fine works. There's just a small list. All of these works, some of them deal with gender with robot characters, and some of them are more fantasy-oriented or talk about magic or something like that, or paranormal characters, but they're all super great. Most of them, if not all of them, are by queer creators. And so that is all I've got. Thank you very much.